Hello everyone, and welcome to a super special video. So, Wilds of Eldraine is about to release, which means it is time to talk about the cards from this set that might actually have a chance to see play in 60 card formats. So today, I'm joined by Crim, probably better known as the Asian Avenger. How are you today, Crim?
Yo, what's up? I'm excited. The set is looking pretty, fantastic. Very much so for tempo players.
Yeah, this is a very interesting set for sure. It's funny. So we're doing our top 10 standard cards, but we're doing it a little bit different this time compared to last times, where we're going to kind of have our personal top 10 lists and go through them. And I think it works really well for this set because the cards you're most hyped for from this set are a lot different than the ones I'm most hyped for. You're really hyped about like fairies and tempo. I kind of like the roll mechanic. I think we both like adventures in general. We both have a lot of adventures on our list, but we really like very different parts of the set. So our lists actually look very, very different. So the way we're going to do this is we each have a group of honorable mentions, essentially, that are the cards in our top 10 that didn't make our final 10 list. And now we're going to go back and forth through our top 5 cards each. So like my number 5, Crim's number 5, until we get through the entire list. So that's the plan for today. So let's jump right into it and start talking about these cards. And we're going to kick things off with my 6th through 10th cards, the ones that didn't make the top 10 list. So we got 4 cards here. Archon of Wild Rose, Virtue of Loyalty, Regal Bunnycorn, in the Iron Crag. So these cards I like for different reasons. Archon of the Wild Rose, I think, is pretty sweet for the roll deck, just making all of your creatures that are enchanted by auras into 4/4s with flying. I can imagine a roll deck where you just curve out with roll creatures, 1, 2, 3. Then you drop this and you have like 12 flying power that just swings in and closes out the game really quickly. So I think this might be like a key 4-drop if rolls are going to work. Virtue of Loyalty, I was tempted to put this number 1 on my list because we all know the power of Circle of Loyalty. We have a good history with white mythic enchantment cycles from Eldraine. But this one's got to be better than Circle of Loyalty, right, Crim? It's got to be. Like, it makes a 2/2, it puts counters on things. I don't think it's busted, but it's got to be good, right?
It's going to be hard to beat Circle of Loyalty, but if there were something, I think it's got to be this version, right? So I think this card is sweet.
It's the best loyalty. We'll give it that. Best loyalty from Eldraine.
Right. Yeah, we'll call it the best loyalty for sure. I think it is like actually a very powerful virtue, like part of the cycle. And I mean, I'm actually like probably the highest of like the virtues. I think this is probably like my favorite one.
Ooh, so for me, it's number 2. I have another one that's actually in my top 5 list, but I do think this card is good, and I do like this entire cycle. Like, just the formatting of it's very powerful, like a cheap spell effect that you can use early, and then a kind of overcosted but powerful enchantment you can use late. It's kind of like a charm where neither one of the sides of the virtues you'd play on their own, but because they're both together, I think it's actually a pretty powerful package. My final 2, Regal Bunnycorn, it just gets really big. I don't know if that's good enough in current standard because we have a lot of removal and there's a lot of things that can just kill the Bunnycorn, but this is going to be a 2-drop that if you're like playing Wedding Announcements and some of the other good go wide cards in standard, this can easily be like a 2-mana 6/6 or 10/10, like without any work because its power toughness equal number non-land permanents you control. And then the last pick, a little speculative, but the Iron Crag, we haven't had a 2-mana rock in standard since, I want to say, World Wake and Everflowing Chalice, so we're talking more than a decade. This one is legendary, but it can turn into an equipment, which I guess is an upside. But I'm imagining this card could be pretty powerful in a ramp deck. I like what it does to the ramp curve. Like, we see decks going Top Fury Stomper, Invasion of Zendikar, Atraxa Atali. This lets you go turn 2 Iron Crag, turn 3 into the Invasion of Zendikar, turn 4 Atali or an Atraxa. So it speeds up that ramp curve by a clock. So I think it's a very good ramp card at least. So those are my kind of honorable mentions. But Crim, you also have a group of honorable mentions that just missed out on the top 10 list proper. Why don't you walk us through the other cards you're hyped about from this set?
All right. So, you know how you were just talking about Sheoldred and all these cards that are just like these creatures, right? That are like absurdly powerful or whatever, right? Well, I kind of love this Spell of the End, which is 2 black, and it costs 2 less to cast if you have Fateful Hour, I guess, which is if you have 5 or less life. And it exiles target creature or planeswalker, search its controller's graveyard, hand, and deck for any copies with the same name, exile it, you know the whole deal. They draw the cards equal to the number that are exiled from their hand. Is this card not sweet?
The card
like
is
this
sweet.
is a 4-mana removal spell that is like a super sever the bloodline. And it's like you can kind of just take control of the BNR announcements however you want. And then so I'm verifying this with you, Seth. Okay.
Yes.
So Innistrad is not gone, right? So we'll still have the Innistrad sets. Meaning, what about Realm Scorcher Hellkite? The bargain mechanic. Because we still got Blood Tithe Harvester. We've still got all these things that generate just tokens and stuff like that. So for a 6-drop 4/6 flying haste, this enters the battlefield, and if it was bargained, you get to add 4 mana any color. I think that's pretty good. And then you can ping stuff down, anything, by the way. I also love Hornlock Whale as a control finisher, because it just on its 2 mana instant side can pretty much tuck something or put it on top. But then lastly, another thing is Twinning Twins. 2 blue, Flying Vigilant, Ward 1/4/4, sure. But it has an instant speed ability. It has an adventure mode, which is an instant 2 mana, 1 and a white, exile target non-token creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So a flicker effect attached to a 4/4 Flying Vigilant with Ward 1. I don't know, like this seems like it's perfect in some kind of tempo deck. Yeah, you know it. I'm already looking into Esper Fairies. And I think if there is an Esper Fairies deck, I think this has got to be somewhere in there. Swift Spiral seems nice. And then getting the body on top of that. Adventures, I was low on the last time we were like in Eldraine. I was a little low on them. This time, no. No.
Not underrating
These cards
that.
Are too good.
Me either. Yeah, 2 cards in 1 really strong. And I think you see that with stuff like Swift Spiral. Most of the time, you can't play a card like Swift Spiral, like the 2 mana flicker effect, because it's just very conditional. But when it's attached to a pretty good flyer, that's a way you can have that effect in the main deck. It reminds me a little of Touch the Spirit Realm, how I play it as a removal spell in mono white, but then sometimes I just like flicker my Elishnorn and it survives a removal spell, and it's kind of ridiculous when you manage to do that. Twinning Twins is kind of does similar things. I gotta ask you about Hornlock Whale. Do you think just the removal half would see play? Like the creature half's kind of like meh-ish, like it's a fine finisher, but it's not exciting. The removal side though feels really good to me for a blue removal spell, like 2 mana instant to tuck a attacking creature. Isn't that pretty above the curve just as a mono blue removal spell?
Yeah. And then on top of that, at some point, you can get a 6/6 like Ward 2 flashing whale, right?
And tapped, yes.
The removal, sure. I don't know why they had to put it tapped. That seems like a weird thing. Like, what? Why? But yeah, so...
It's probably gonna feel bad if you see it sitting in exile, like you just can never attack because anything. Like it would just be like, how you play around Settle the Wreckage or Wandering Emperor, but now you see and they have it, so you can just never attack.
Your opponent just spent 6 mana to flash in a whale, though. Come on, it's but yeah, like, I think the removal on its own is good. I think these 5 cards are my bottom 5, I guess. And I think Realm Scorcher Hellkite is just going to be as good as Bargain is going to be in Standard. Because if Bargain's good, I think this dragon is cracked. It's a 4/6 with haste.
I think
and
Bargain's...
it can ping anything.
Bargain's got to be good. There's just so many ways to make bloods and foods and treasures that it seems like if you want to, it's pretty easy to have a random token on the battlefield. So I imagine that Bargain's actually going to be pretty good.
And don't forget, we still have one of the extremely powerful battles in the invasion of Tarkir or whatever.
Oh, right. That cares about dragons. Yeah, good point. Need some Wilds of Eldraine cards? Well, you can snag them from our sponsor, Card Kingdom, over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Well, let's move on to our top 5s proper. And like usual, if you want to see our whole top 10 list, check out the article. I'll link it in the description. But moving on to my number 5 card. I mentioned I like the white Virtue, but there's a Virtue I like even better. That's the black Virtue in Virtue of Persistence. So this is another member of the cycle. You get a cheap spell side, which is 2 mana, sorcery, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn, you gain 2 life. And then the enchantment side is essentially Portal to Phyrexia, or for boomers, Debtor's Knell, but mono black. You just get to reanimate something from any graveyard every upkeep. I feel like this card, because black is already so heavily played in Standard, it's already the best color in Standard. To me, this feels like a very easy addition to some of the already best decks in the format to just give you another late game bomb. Like, the removal side, if it was an instant, I would say it was on curve. As a sorcery, it's a little bit below the curve to give -3/-3, although gaining 2 life helps make up for that a little bit. Like, if you take a hit and then kill it during your turn, the 2 life helps buffer your life total from that attack, and then you just get this really powerful Portal to Phyrexia hanging out in exile, waiting if the game goes long to come down and kind of close out the game. So I feel like this is probably not a 4 of, but I imagine this is like a solid at least like 2 of in some of the mono black and Dimir style decks. But what do you think, Crim? Am I overrating this? Like, to me, this feels just like a staple level card for black in some number, but is it not as good as I think?
Okay, so the removal, first off, do aggro decks exist outside of soldiers? Right? Like, okay, my problem is at 7 mana, yes, I have a removal spell right at the 2 mana slot, so that I do like that. I do like that it's flexible, versatile, and then when you get to 7 mana, you get this Virtue, the big enchantment, but the enchantment to me doesn't feel that powerful. Like, when you have Breach the Multiverse at 7 mana, right? Like, that fills both yards, gets 2 things. I would rather that than just this enchantment that sits around.
But
right?
sometimes
like,
don't you die before you get to Breach? I guess maybe in current Standard that doesn't happen much because everyone is just playing the grindiest deck, so you're always going to get to 7 mana. So maybe that's not an issue in current Standard. But I think for me the thing that makes it is Breach more powerful as reanimation, yes. But Breach also does nothing until you get to 7 mana. It just sits in your hand and is a dead card. This takes down a Spirited Companion, or it takes down something from the red deck, or even the black decks. You have like the level up Figure of Destiny thing, evolving, whatever it's called. Like, there's things that kills.
Sleeper or whatever.
Yeah, there's things you can take down even against the other top tier decks outside of Esper. Maybe you don't care about this card because you play no creatures and you just have Wandering Emperor tokens to kill. But
I mean, is this even good when you think like so? Yeah, you can get sleeper, resident sleeper agent or whatever, right? If you do it on time. But otherwise, what are you targeting? Like. Yeah. Like, are you gonna? It's only good against aggro. So
it gets Gix. It gets Gix against mono black. I've seen more Gixes lately.
Kind of fringe, yeah, sure. This is as good as it, as there are aggro decks. If the format has no aggro decks, then I probably don't want this, right?
I will say I feel like this cycle makes me doubly happy they banned Invoke Despair, because these cards would be so unplayable if Invoke was still there to deal with big enchantment. So at least the whole cycle has some chance now that Invoke is not in 50% of decks or whatever. But let's keep moving on. Crim, number 5 on your list. So Crim, WEREFOX Bodyguard, tell us about it.
All right. So WEREFOX Bodyguard, right now, we've still got like Brutal Cathar and all that stuff, right? But like, this card seems cracked. First off, it's got flash. So now all of a sudden mono white is like looking juicy again, where you're getting more flashy threats. Is this going to all of a sudden make you better than black? Maybe not. But this is just such an efficient card. Like, you can flash it in, protect your own creature in a Restoration Angel kind of like situation. Because that's what I realized about it. It's like, I don't have to just target your stuff. I can target mine. You can pay 2 mana randomly to sack it and gain 2 life. And that means you can pop it, bring something back out. This is just such a versatile white removal spell. So I really, really like this card just because of that.
So what do you think about this versus Brutal Cathar? Is this just better Brutal Cathar? Is it for different decks, depending on what archetype you're in? One's going to be better than the other. How do you think that actually shakes out, since we have 2 kind of similar effects?
So the funny thing here is this card actually makes me think that it might be better than Brutal Cathar. Okay, so Brutal Cathar, if you get Night and Day to switch numerous times, you're picking off numerous things, right? Yep. That's great. This doesn't do that. But I wonder if it opens a different way for you to play soldiers. Because soldiers could potentially drop Cathar, play this, and then this means now, because like soldiers has the 2 mana like flash creature that essentially makes 2 1/1s.
Zephyr or whatever, this. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And also reinforcements.
Yep, the reinforcements protect the negotiators. Soldiers can now actually play at this tempo-y kind of instant speed with this. And you can also protect your own stuff with it, which can be huge, right? Like, maybe I just need to save my 2-drop creature that gives everything flying if you attack with 5 soldiers or more. So I
Harbin.
do that.
Jeez. Yeah,
Harbin,
that actually seems very scary, because Harbin's like the finisher. That's the card that, like, oh, they just drop it and kill you on the spot. And having this as a way to protect it seems very good. So I actually like that idea. Maybe some sort of flash soldier deck could actually be kind of powerful in standard. I think that could actually be a cool way to go about it. I do think it probably matters. Creature type maybe is also a determining factor. Like, if you're humans, you probably still want Brutal Cathar, but otherwise, like, for soldiers or something, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, in a vacuum, if you don't care about creature types, then I think WEREFOX Bodyguard is probably better. I think the upside of saving your own thing is higher than the possibilities of exiling multiple things. And exiling multiple things isn't always great. I've definitely had games where my opponent exiles like 3 things, and then you kill the Brutal Cathar, and they are very, very sad and just end up losing the game. So there is risk to having a bunch of creatures piled up under Brutal Cathar. But let's keep moving on. Number 4 on my list, we're heading into Adventure World with Questing Druid. So Questing Druid, oh, this card is so good. One of the things about these adventures is a lot of the spell sides are pretty on curve, and that's what I like about Questing Druid. The spell side, Seek the Beast, 1 in a red instant, exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until your next end step, you can play those cards. So we've seen, like, Reckless Impulse, a bunch of these red 2-mana, draw 2 for a turn spells. This is essentially another version, except you want to cast it on your opponent's turn a lot of the time, and then you can use the cards during your turn. And then Questing Druid is literally just Quirion Druid, except it also has a spell attached to it. It's been a while since Quirion Druid. Getting a counter whenever you cast a spell that's white, red, black, or blue has actually been playable, but I think if you attach a spell to it, it becomes much more powerful. This is kind of an army in a can, because you can play the creature side and then use additional copies casting the spell side to grow, and that's one of the things I like about these kind of teamer spellslinger adventure cards. So for me, the fact that the spell side of this card is already an effect that sees play, I think that makes it just a slam dunk. Like, you get the creature as kind of a bonus on top of a relatively on-curve spell. The only problem I see with this card is it doesn't have an obvious home. Like, green is the worst color in standard, and we have a lot of good Spellslinger pieces, but we've never really seen Spellslinger take off in standard, even though a lot of those pieces exist. I guess maybe outside of the mono blue Delver deck or mono blue Tempo deck, but we haven't seen like a prowessy style Spellslinger deck really be a thing in standard. So is this enough to make one of those archetypes, like a green deck or a Spellslinger deck or a Gruul deck? Is this enough to make it good? We'll have to wait and see, but I do think this is a very powerful standard playable card that does 2 pretty good things, like a card draw spell mixed with a creature. That's just an inherently powerful effect that you see on adventures.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there at the end. It's just like, this is a sweet card, but there is no home. There is no deck that would play this, right? What, 4-color ramp, maybe?
You need really... So, this is a card, to me, I think it's like, dependent on other cards in this set to be good. Like, we have a Elusive Otter, which is another one of the adventure kind of Spellslinger cards, like a 1-mana 1/1 prowess mixed with a cheap spell. So you're going to have like a teamer prowess Miracle Grow style deck that like takes advantage of multiple adventure cards from Wilds of Eldraine. The pieces exist to build that deck. The question is, does that compete with Esper Control, Dimir Midrange, Mono White? Like, is it of that power level? That's what we're not going to know until we actually can start playing with the cards. Like, I hope so. I think standard would be better if decks like that are strong enough to compete. But really, like, is there any chance, Crim? Am I just being too optimistic that something's going to be able to keep up with the strong decks that already exist?
I'm not going to ever try to, like, look, I'm not going to lie to you here. I'm pretty happy that green is getting dumpstered right now. So, but I will say that I think that maybe, what about Jund Windgrace? A deck that was, like, really popular at a point. That kind of just fell off, right? So, is this something that Jund Windgrace could want?
I mean, I actually think as we go along our list, there's another adventure creature that I'm even higher on that's really good in Jund. So maybe we can see, maybe Jund is the way to go. Maybe, like, because the thing is, current standard is very grindy. Adventures are naturally grindy because they're 2 cards in 1. So maybe Adventures is the kind of mechanic that can actually allow some of these other colors to compete with the top decks in the format. So I'm really high in this card. We'll have to wait and see where it fits. That's the only question. But let's keep moving on. Number 4 on Crim's list. Ooh, we have an uncommon fairy, Crim. Why don't you tell us about number 4 on your list?
All right. So naturally, I got to choose my fairies. And like, one thing we've learned is adventures that curve into the body have usually been very good, right? You go stomp, Bone Crusher, right? And this card, Spellscorn Coven, is a 3 and a black fairy 2/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, right? But the adventure, the instant half is Take It Back, which is 2 and a blue, return target spell to its owner's hand. So you're going to get into points where you're in a top deck war and whatnot. You play this into their big clunky spell, their Breach the Multiverse, and then make them discard it. It's huge. This plays into the tempo plan so nice. Like, I'm sorry, I think this card is amazing, right? Like, whether there is a Fairies deck or maybe even this just gets slotted into Dimir midrange, maybe now Dimir midrange can finally be good. I think it finally has enough support,
it might get there this
finally,
time, yeah.
yeah. I don't know. I think just the tempo plays that this can create into the body to just eat the last card in the hand is big. Now we also have Liliana. Adventures play real nice with Liliana because you can just use it. They go tuck off into some other direction, and then Lily upticks. So I don't know. I mean, this card seems really good.
I do like how it curves. As you mentioned, like, the best adventures we've ever seen curve spell into creature, and that's exactly what we see here. My only thing with this card is both modes seem like maybe overcosted by a mana-ish, like, compared to what they would be otherwise. But maybe that's fine because you get so much flexibility out of the card. And I do like the line you're saying of, like, bounce the big spell, make you discard it. It does synergize well. Do you think this is something that could make fairies work as a deck crim? Like, are you hyped about playing all the fairies together? Or are you more, like, thinking of generic, mid-rangey Dimir synergies and whatnot?
I think this can go in both. I do like fairies. There's definitely a lot, but the problem is right now there's no Bitter Blossom, right? Yeah. You need a Bitter Blossom and an actual Spell Stutter sprite. Spell Stutter is a sweet counterspell. I like it. But yeah, we'll see once we get to testing and whatnot. But like, legitimately right now, I think this is just a generically good card.
Well, let's keep moving on. Number 3 on my list. We're going back to adventures. This time the adventure curves backwards, unfortunately. But I still think this card is a very nice aggro threat for white aggro decks, Boros style decks, and that's Heartflame Duelist. So Heartflame Duelist, spell side, 3 mana lightning bolt at instant speed. So a little overcosted. Creature side though, a 2 mana 3/1 that gives your instants and sorcery spells lifelink. So this is kind of like reverse Bone Crusher Giant. Bone Crusher was so powerful because you could shock on 2, creature on 3. Heartflame Duelist is not going to do that. If you want to play the spell side, you got to wait till 3 mana, which is a bit awkward. But if you have multiples, you can always run out the creature side and kind of like build a lightning helix with the second side. I imagine the play pattern for this card is going to be more turn 3 burn, and then turn 4 double 2-drop is going to be kind of your ideal curve with this card. But I think a 3/1 that has some upside is good enough to see play, and I really like that this is a card that can give your like human deck or give your white aggro deck, which is normally super creature centric, a little bit of reach. It's easy enough to take mono white aggro, mono white humans, mono white knights, and like splash a little bit of red in your mana base, and once you get your opponent low, this is just a way you can close out the game directly. It's a way you can get a blocker out of the way. So I think the flexibility of this card, even though it curves in a little bit of an awkward direction, makes me very interested in any sort of white-based aggro deck. But what do you think about this one, Crim? Does the reverse curve, is that too much of an issue with this card?
I mean, you're talking about an aggro deck, right? Like,
yeah, so it'd have to be like
kinda
mono white humans. I mean, it's still a 3/1 for 2. So even if you ignore the spell side, you do have an aggressive body. There's no Orcish Bowmasters in standard, thankfully, so you're not getting sniped.
Sure, aggressive, if you want to call it that. My thing here is, I'm pretty low on this card because if you want it in an aggro deck, then you're paying a lot just for 3 damage, right? The creature half, that seems like something a mid-range deck wants. Ooh. Right? Like a mid-range Boros deck that's trying to grind, maybe inch out a little bit more life. Maybe would you throw this? You could also just do it in the other direction. What if mono red added white?
That also seems like a possibility. Although, like,
right, because then you could offset like some of the loss of maybe like a Sheoldred or maybe an opposing mirror match of burn or something like that, right? But I don't know. This just feels kind of awkward. Like, I like the 3 damage part, sure, but the two mana part curving in the weirdest direction, and on top of that, seems to not want to play in an aggro deck, seems to more want to play in a grindy mid-range deck.
I mean, we've seen Boros be a thing in the past, and one of the things about our big standard is our mana bases are pretty good at this point. So if you do want to be mono red and splash a little white for Heartflame Duelist, or you are mono white and you want to splash a little red to have Heartflame Slash, that's very possible without really wrecking your mana base. So I feel like the power of 3-year standard mana bases is going to make it pretty easy for this card to show up in various places. So I really like it. It's not Bone Crusher, but that's probably a good thing that it's not Bone Crusher, because Bone Crusher was maybe just a little bit too much for standard. And just remember, also Archangel of Wrath was a card that got a lot of play early on. Yeah. And so I don't know. I mean, maybe there's like Mardu Burn, Mardu Life Gain Burn. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We also got the Red Virtue too, which cares about non-creature damage. So maybe that could also be a part of something like that. So anyway, let's keep moving on. Crim, number 2 on your list. Number 3 on your list rather. I gotta tell you, this was a card I completely wrote off as like a janky combo piece, and then I saw it on your list, and we started talking about it, and I think you maybe like partly sold me on Sleep Curse Fairy. But why don't you give us number 3 on your list here? Okay.
So if there's a fairies deck, right? Like let's not even talk about the fairies deck. Actually, let's talk about. So what it does is it is a 1 mana 3/3 flying ward 2, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped with 3 stun counters. Pay 1 and a blue to untap it. Right? Okay. So let's talk about, just for example, right out the gates, that blue-green deck that you had played at the beginning of whatever format that uses Venerated Rot Priest. Right? Yep. That is a deck that exists. You have Ivy, you have all these things, which is another fairy, by the way. Like you can use Shore Up. Shore Up will untap this, right? And then it would eat a counter, right?
No, I don't think so. I don't think Shore Up would untap it. It would remove a counter.
It would eat a counter, right?
It would eat a counter. Yes.
So you can do tons of things like with Shore Up and then to kind of chip away at the counters. But you also have the fact here is like you have a 1-drop that comes down and adds to your fairy count, right? Yeah. And then let's say you play Ivy or something like that. You have Spell Stutter now, which is a counter spell, counter target spell unless its controller pays 2, plus an additional 1 for each fairy you control, right? So this is just an early fairy that comes down that adds to that. So it seems like it synergizes with a lot of the fairy package, whatever Ivy package. But on top of that, you have Tekuthal, which is like part of the Dominus cycle or whatever. Like you have Mondrak, you have all of that, right? The blue one. The blue one can eat 3 counters, give itself indestructible, which would then untap this thing, right? So I don't know. This card feels like it's oozing with potential to be used. Is it going to be a format all-star? I'm not sure yet, but it does feel like it has. This could be the start of a new home. Like it could start its own archetype. It's powerful enough. It's a very good 3-drop. I mean, Delver still takes like 9 turns to flip for me, so this is already easier to get to the 3/3 flying side. So I don't know. It has Ward 2 on top of that. So it's not going to be easy for your opponent to remove this.
No, I mean, it's going to stick around. There's a bunch of, there's several cards actually that are pretty good if you have a fairy on the battlefield. You mentioned the counter. There's also like Ego Drain, which is Thoughtseize if you have a fairy. Yep. There's a removal spell that's like 1 mana -3/-3 at instant speed. Plus it is an X spell, Fairy Fencing, I think it is. So there's a bunch of reasons just to have a fairy on the battlefield. This also has combo potential. Whenever I see a Horseshoe Crab effect, a creature that can untap itself, I'm always looking for like, what kind of combo do we have to like combo with this? And we have Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which can switch your activated abilities around by exiling stuff from the graveyard. So there's like janky infinite mana combo, probably not going to be competitive in standard, but worth being aware of. The only thing I'd say about this card is like, have a plan for it. Like, I think this card is strong and it has a lot of things going on with it, but I don't think it's a creature that you just run out in a generic deck and expect it to go that well, because if you do it that way, it's untapping turn 4 or something, turn 5. Like, it's going to take a while if you're not like removing the counters, having synergies for it. So seems very good in decks that can synergize with it, but if you can't synergize with it, I probably wouldn't play it as a generic threat, I don't think.
I agree. I mean, like, yeah, as I said, it's going to be in the FAERIE package or whatever. Like, I think there could be something with a blue-green, like, Venerated Rot Priest, stuff like that. Or as I said, like, if you could try to be cute and cheeky, if there's something that just has a ton of counters to throw around, then you could Tekuthal. I don't know. This is just a very powerful 1-drop.
Let's keep moving on. Number 2 on our list, we're actually both in agreement on. This was number 2 on both of our lists, and that is Charming Scoundrel. And for me, this card's pretty simple. There's a pretty long history in Standard of red 2/2 hasters being very strong cards. We even see that in current Standard with Felden, even though it can't block, kind of being a staple mono red threat. I think that Charming Scoundrel is just the next in a long line of red 2/2 hasters if you put the Wicked Roll on it. That's the base mode. You have a 2-minute 2/2 haste that when it or the aura dies, it's going to deal an extra damage to your opponent. That by itself is a playable mono red card in Standard, I'm pretty sure, just based on the history of mono red decks in Standard. And this does a lot more. This has a treasure token that can ramp you into your 4-drop. It can fill your graveyard. So to me, I think this is just like easy 4 of, if you're playing a red deck in Standard, this is going to be one of the foundational pieces of that deck. But Crim, you also had this at number 2 on your list. What are you thinking about Charming Scoundrel?
I mean, nothing that you haven't already said, right? This thing is just versatile, right? It gives, it's now like, hey, aggro decks also get versatile creatures, right? And I don't know if this helps it overcome Sheoldred or whatever, but like, point here is you do get to ramp, you get to loot, you get to do all of that. This is just going to be in the deck. Simple as that.
I played Wily Goblins in my day, and this is a very good Wily Goblin.
Oh, God.
Wily Goblin plus.
This is so much better than Wily Goblin, too. Like, oh my God, this is like Wily Goblin only making the treasures. This can do any and all of that.
So good. Such a like very, very push redded aggro card. But let's move on. Number 1 on our list. We got another 2-drop topping my list in MOSSWOOD DREADKNIGHT. So MOSSWOOD DREADKNIGHT, to me, this card seems like I think this is the best adventure card for Standard. So MOSSWOOD DREADKNIGHT, it's spell side, 1 in a black sorcery, you draw a card, lose a life. Not very exciting, like bad cantrip. The exciting part about this card is you get a 3-mana 3/2 with trample, that when it dies, you can cast it from your graveyard as an adventure until your next turn. So this is essentially a recursive, never-ending 3-mana 3/2. It's essentially Tenacious Underdog, if you think about it. Tenacious Underdog's 4-mana to blitz from your graveyard and draw a card, except it's a Tenacious Underdog that can also play defense. Like, you can, for every turn when this dies, you can recast it for 4 total mana, 2 for Dread Whispers, you draw a card, lose a life, 2 more to then MOSSWOOD DREADKNIGHT from exile as an adventure, get a 3/2 trample around the battlefield. That to me seems like an incredibly powerful effect in our grindy Standard. Like, Standard is all about these super late game grindy matchups. I feel like this card is just built to work with what Standard is doing. Again, the only question, similar to the Druid we talked about earlier, it is a card that has green in its cost, and green has not been the best color in Standard. But I feel like these adventures, you can see the pieces for some sort of like pretty grindy but still aggressive Jund deck that can maybe card advantage and keep up with the really top tier decks in the format. So to me, this feels like just recursive 2-drops have always been very powerful in Standard, and I feel like this is a really good one because it can play defense as well as offense. But what do you think, Grim? You didn't have this card on your list at all. Are you not as high on MOSSWOOD DREADKNIGHT?
I don't like this card at all because of the green part. Like, and not just because my normal disdain for green. I just think that it's like, what home does this have, right? Like, if you find a home for it, and let's say you do, right? This kind of just seems okay. It doesn't seem.
Couldn't you take, so we see right now in Standard, Demir's like number 1, right? That's probably the top deck in best of 3 Standard. And that's essentially mono black splashing blue for like the 2-drop FAERIE, some counter spells. Couldn't you take the black base and splash green instead and play this in like, I don't know, other green cards that are good, which might not exist in Standard, but you know what I'm saying? Like, isn't that a possibility? Or like Jund mid-range? Can we Jund him out?
If we're talking about strictly the optimal play, no. Why would you do that? The blue is just better, right? The blue is so much better between like Make Disappear and the FAERIE Mastermind is huge. Just, it's great when you play this and they FAERIE Mastermind you, and now you're helping them draw a card every time as well, right? So like I just don't feel this card is that good in the Standard, but like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
Adventures.
I'd
Adventures
like to
bringing
see.
green back. We're gonna bring green back. We'll see. It's a long road for green to be good, but I actually have faith that this set green is gonna improve. We'll see if it gets all the way to competing with the top tier decks. That is up for debate, but I think outside of color concerns of green not being that strong, I feel like this is just a very, very powerful card. But let's move on, Crim. You got a different adventure at the top of your list in Decadent Dragon #1. Tell us about this new 4-drop and 3-drop, I guess, technically.
Oh my god. Again, curving into itself, right? The spell half 2 and a black instant adventure. Exile the top 2 cards of target opponent's library face down. You may look at it and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. Now, keep in mind, that does not say that you could spend mana however you want. So you do have to pay the real mana costs of it. But let's say you exile 2 and you can play anything there, so you can get their lands as well. And then of course you've got Decadent Dragon itself, which is a 4/4 flying trample, and when it attacks, create a treasure token. And by the way, remember how we talked about Invasion of Tarkir? I'm starting to think this is looking a little better every second now. I am really liking this adventure. It draws 2 off your opponent's deck. Gives you a 4/4 that could potentially just start ramping you out of control. What's not to love about this card? If they kill the creature half, you've already still got value face down. So, I don't know. If you're talking about grinding and you're talking about colors that are played, I could see Grixis. I could see maybe Jund, right? And like this could make that happen.
There we go.
This is more likely to make a green deck appear to me than the MOSSWOOD Knight. But like I think I love this dragon. It's so efficient at what it is, and it's such a disgusting like creature if it goes unanswered. So I don't know.
That's true. We've seen like Goldspan really snowballed by making a treasure when it attacks. Of course, it had a bunch of upsides where it like has haste, and if it gets targeted, you get a treasure. But still, like we've seen even the Goblin token from Fable the Mirror Breaker attacking to make a treasure can snowball out of control. So we've seen similar effects be very, very strong. 4/4 flying for 4 with trample is actually like a pretty good rate. The only thing I'll say is like I feel like the cards from expensive tastes are going to go to waste sometimes. I think that's just like a risk you take because it doesn't fix your mana. There's going to be some situations where you don't hit a land, you don't ever make a treasure because your opponent just kills the dragon. So, but that's still probably fine, especially since this is an instant, which is probably the most surprising part of this to me. You can leave up your removal spells, like cast this on your opponent's end step, dragon the next turn. So I do think this card is very powerful, and the adventure designs from this set I think are really, really good. I think compared to last time, one thing I like that Wizards did is they didn't really give us a payoff for putting all the adventures together. There's no Edgewall Innkeeper. There's no Lucky Clover. There's no Lucky Clover to copy them. But a lot of them just feel like really strong standalone cards. So I think we're going to see a lot of these adventures in Standard. And Decadent Dragon didn't quite make my top 10 list, but I do think this card is very, very solid. So anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our top 10 standard cards from Wilds of Eldraine. So,
wait. We also should mention that, by the way, all the creature lands are very good and they'll be played.
Yeah, so we generally have a rule that we don't do the land cycles because the land cycle is almost always like the #1 most playable card from the set. Definitely agree with you. I've seen some people saying they didn't think that creature lands were good anymore, even in Standard, and I think those people are kind of insane because I think creature lands in Standard in specific are like really, really strong still. Like
especially
Standard's
with
so
the
grindy.
Decreased activation costs.
Yeah, the creature lands are actually pretty competitively costed, and we're just in a very, like, sweepery, grindy style of Standard, and having threats in your mana base to come in and close out the game after a Farewell or a Sunfall or whatever, I think that's going to be very, very impactful in Standard. So I expect those to be, like, 4 of staples in decks of their colors, right? Like, you can jam a bunch of those in Standard. And plus, it's a pretty slow Standard. Like, there's like mono white, and even the black decks are pretty mid range. You're getting up to 7 drops, so I think you can afford to play a couple of tap lands based on their power. So good call on that. I think we'll be seeing a lot of those. But anyway, let us know what you think. What are your top Standard cards from Wilds of Eldraine? Let us know in the comments, and we'll be back tomorrow with a video talking about the top Eternal cards from Wilds of Eldraine. So non-standard, non-commander cards, historic and modern and all that stuff. So Crim, thanks for hanging out talking about some Standard.
Oh, I was happy to be here.
And yeah, we'll see you all tomorrow. So until then, everyone, have a great day. And this is the crew signing out.